Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for coming through. This is a free Q&A session where we open things up for anyone who is interested in the topic that we have at hand. And we answer your questions based on our experience working with our clients and based on best practice and based on research that's out there related to the topic. Today's topic is a fun one and one that's really top of mind for a lot of people. We know that hybrid and remote work and teams is something that is brand new for a lot of leaders. So we wanted to make sure that we offered this for anyone who was interested. Before we get started, I wanted to start with an introduction. So before we dig into that content, who am I? What am I here to do and why do I do it? So just a quick intro. My name is Natalia. I am very excited to be here speaking to you on behalf of C Network, the company that I lead. I'm also excited because I've been working in diversity, equity, and inclusion for about 9 years now, specifically working at companies and nonprofit organizations like Facebook and Teach for America, and have really been able to see the evolution in attention given to this topic, the evolution in interest in this topic, and have loved what has happened recently, which is a renewed interest in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Since working in this space at those companies, nonprofits, and in other spaces as well, I also received degrees. My NYU degrees for my undergrad and my Wharton degree was an MBA, all around inclusive leadership and what it means to develop an inclusive workplace. So I'm always really excited to talk about this. It's been about 9 years now that I've been working in diversity, equity, and inclusion in one capacity or another. And recently, about a year and a half ago, a little bit more than that, I started Seen at Work. We're a diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm. We support businesses in every size and every industry. We support them with their diversity, equity, and inclusion needs. And we have been just loving all of our work with our clients, but have found that there are so many things that we can also support individuals with, specifically individuals who have a deep desire to make their workplaces more inclusive, a deep desire to ensure that their spaces are equitable and that they're bringing in diverse talent and keeping people happy as they work and thrive in that workplace. So we are a team of diversity, equity, and inclusion consultants. You can learn more about us at cnetwork.com. Just wanted to give you that intro before we jump into the meat of this, which of course you're all here to talk specifically about remote and hybrid work and how to make sure that those remote and hybrid workplaces are inclusive. So let's talk about this. How is work changing? I don't think I need to tell you that work has changed quite a bit since the onset of the pandemic. But just to make sure that we're all on the same page, there's been quite a significant transition to leveraging our mobile devices, our laptops in any way possible on our teams and with our colleagues in a way that allows us to move forward with our work at home. And so that means hybrid work is becoming more prominent. It means remote work is becoming more prominent. And here are some stats actually that you may know, but that reinforce that topic. So we know that employees nowadays, especially since the onset of the pandemic over a year ago, employees now want to work from home on average 2.5 days a week, according to a Harvard Business Review survey of 5,000 Americans. People have really become more accustomed to remote work. And what we're finding as well is that productivity actually isn't so bad, right? People are able to be productive at home and people are able to move forward with what they desire to do. Companies are able to allow their employees to move and progress pretty productively in a way that I think surprised a lot of people, and employees are responding now. What's interesting about this is that we see this not just with all employees, but also with specific demographics of employees. So we know from some of the recent surveys that have gone out, including this one by Harvard Business Review, that people of color and highly educated women with young children have been placing an especially high value on the ability to work from home at least part of the week. And that's something that we're also seeing come through in some of the research, where people are enjoying that flexibility generally, and then especially some of these other groups, specifically people of color and women with small children, are finding that they're interested in at least having some days of the week where they get to stay at home. And so as employers and leaders are thinking about now moving into this space of office versus remote, a lot of people are landing in the hybrid zone, which, just so that we're all on the same page, hybrid means that there are some days a week that you go in and some days a week that you don't, that you stay at home and continue to work remotely. And it's really interesting to see because many of the firms that are out there, in fact, among the millions of firms that are trying remote work during the pandemic, fewer than 20% say that they're planning to have employees return full-time when the pandemic ends. Not sure what you're seeing or what you're experiencing within your companies, but I imagine the fact that you're here means that there might be some of that happening in your experience as well. So let's talk about it. What do leaders need to do in order to ensure that while we make this transition into more remote, a more hybrid setup, what do leaders need to do in order to ensure that it's still an inclusive workplace, that people are still feeling like they can be their full selves at work? I do want to start us off with some discussion around the three things that I do think leaders need to keep in mind while considering making their workplaces as inclusive as possible in this hybrid or remote space. And in order to dig into this, I want to introduce just a couple of concepts around this. And while I do, I want to remind you, go ahead and put your questions in. Hopefully this is interesting, but I'm really here to answer your questions. So I'll be on the lookout for any questions that come through for sure. Go ahead and get those into the Q&A bar. So here are the things that most successful leaders and culture makers in this hybrid and remote work environment, here are the things that they're keeping in mind or what they're doing. So this is determined both based on what we've been reading as a team around this, and also in terms of what we've been learning from our clients. We're hearing about the discrepancies between the experience certain teams have because of their managers' approach to this new remote or hybrid world. And the experiences other teams are having because maybe their managers aren't responding or shifting as much. And so we wanted to really highlight the three things that people are keeping in mind in order to be successful as leaders and as team members across this new shift in work. So the most successful leaders are leaders that prioritize psychological safety. And maybe you're unfamiliar with what psychological safety is. Maybe you've heard it a ton and you're just, like, wait, what is that again? Or you know exactly what it is. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, psychological safety is being able to show and employ oneself without fear or without concern about retribution or being penalized. It's about recognizing that you can make mistakes and you won't be seen as someone who maybe is not as competent. It's also about bringing yourself to work and knowing that you won't be penalized for bringing a part of your identity to work. And this is something that is actually hard to do when you're in the office. It can be especially hard to do for team leaders and culture makers when you're not in the office. So this is an important thing for us to keep in mind. Another thing that leaders that we see be successful in this, another thing that they keep in mind is this idea of fostering genuine social connections. Leaders that are thinking consciously about how to foster genuine social connections, even while we're not physically in the same spaces, is very important, very helpful, and something that we can talk more about, specifically how to do this what we're seeing our clients do or what we're hearing in the research is effective on that front. And then the last thing that we see leaders that are successful in this space doing is ensuring equitable access to opportunity. We can talk a whole lot about how remote work and this hybrid model is something that is threatening some of the equitable access people have historically had or not had, maybe making it worse in many workplace scenarios. So these are the things that I suggest people keep in mind. It's what we're seeing leaders do especially well as they're seeking to do this inclusively. And you'll find that maybe a lot of my answers to your questions map back to one of these major buckets. So hopefully it's a framework that you can refer back to as you continue to move forward in your work with your colleagues and your teams. And I want to highlight just before I go into the questions, which I see a couple of questions coming through, which is lovely. We'll get started on answering those in just a second. I see here that these three buckets are, again, talking about three things that have been threatened because of the current state that we're in. Remote work can make it difficult to foster psychological safety. Remote work, as you can imagine, can make it difficult to foster and build genuine social connections. It also can threaten access to opportunity within a workplace. We can talk about some of the statistics and some of the things around that, but it's what we're seeing. And so leaders that focus on ensuring that psychological safety is present, that social connections are made effectively, and that there is equal or equitable access to opportunity are seeing more success. Okay. Yay. We just went through all of my slides so far just to get us started. And I see a couple of questions that have come through and they're a little long. So I'm going to go ahead and read them just maybe a little sporadically. So forgive me if I'm chunking your words. I just want to make sure that I get the point down here. Okay. What should I do if my work environment doesn't feel inclusive, but I don't have the power to make that change? How do I start that process without making my managers feel like it's a personal attack? This is a question that we get all the time, not just in the hybrid versus remote work space, right? This is a question that we hear all the time from employees who are really seeking to make a change, really seeking to impact and influence their work environment, but maybe currently don't have that institutionalized power that a manager or supervisor may have. So rather than confront your managers directly, I encourage you to consider what you can do as a peer right now to ensure that you're building an inclusive workplace. There are things individuals can do, even if they're not the culture makers per se, or the leaders of the teams. And in fact, the reason we talk about culture makers is because we do believe that people can be culture makers and culture influencers without an official title. So you can still do that. So here are some things that you might want to consider doing. You can start by being very clearly open to feedback, modeling that you are open to feedback with your peers, and then offering to give feedback, offering to give opportunities to connect to your peers and modeling that, being very open to those connections, showing that, you want, maybe you set up time for lunches with your peers or even with your leadership, maybe your managers, your supervisors, set up those times to create these positive exchanges. Amongst these three buckets that you see on your screen, the one that a lot of individuals who might not have an institutionalized leadership role, the one that they might be able to best influence is the fostering of genuine social connections. You don't have to be, anyone who is able to just like shift other people's schedules or anything like that in order to create these genuine social connections. So leaning into opportunities related to vulnerability, like creating those spaces where you're storytelling, asking for feedback, demonstrating that you're willing to give feedback in a respectful and caring way, that you want to see other people grow. If you are doing that, that is infectious. It's something, it's contagious. It's something that will run through, and people will get to know you as someone who cares deeply about creating genuine social connections. And it also then seeps into the other two buckets. You might start then creating the sense of psychological safety that people have with you. Your managers may see you as someone who's modeling something that they need to do. And so I think leaning into those opportunities is a really good way for you to build an inclusive space. And then making sure that you're offering yourself up to people in an equitable manner. So maybe reaching out to everyone on a certain cadence, or doing, different luncheons that the whole team can be involved in. If you want to speak directly to your manager, you can go ahead and do that, especially if they've spoken about being inclusive in the past and said that they really care deeply about that. Go ahead and reach out to them and ask them what they think might be the best way to support you, and having that conversation and talking about inclusivity specifically with them and hearing what they're thinking in order to support you and your team will be able to create that exchange of conversation. Okay, we just got so many more questions, which is fun. So let me try to make my answers a little shorter. Here's the next one I see come through. How can I ensure a team member who is 100% remote doesn't miss out on some of the unplanned conversations that inevitably start about some of our client projects while me and other team members are in the office? This is a common question. So there is a lot that's now being studied around ensuring that remote workers are pulled in to those conversations, whether they be conversations that people talk about as being water cooler conversations, like the ones that you have when you're just walking about the office by the water cooler, if those still exist, or whether they be the ones that you're kind of turning around and talking to your colleague about in real time during a meeting, maybe a whispering something that way that the person who is remote can't hear or can't engage in effectively. What we're finding is that one of the major through lines is the importance of having all or nothing meetings when you're meeting about client projects, when you're speaking about your work tasks, your different deliverables. If you have some people that are in the office and some people that are remote, you might want to consider having everyone be remote. And this is something that will eliminate some of those side conversations that might have in those moments during the meeting, or even those moments that might not intentionally be exclusive, but just might feel to the people in the remote setting that they are not in the loop. So many companies at this point are considering adopting one of those all or nothing approaches, and or adopting an approach to hybrid work that means, or that says, that everyone is in the office on particular days, not just some people. Based on your question, it seems that your colleague is 100% remote. So in that instance, I would suggest, to the extent that you can, making your team meetings with this person all remote, even if some of you are in the office. The other thing to consider is keeping a tally of those instances when you might have side conversations with someone. Try not to have them so that this person isn't left out specifically of project-based conversations. But keep a tally of those instances where you have those conversations, and try then to fill that person in later on in the day. Say, we talked about this and this is what we came up with. Or loop them in right then and there in the moment. If it seems that you're taking more than 2 minutes to discuss something, just you and the person in the office, create a rule of sorts where maybe you have a code word or something like that, where it's like, okay, we need to move on to having this person now looped in. Let's call them right now. That I think is one of the bigger things, but the all or nothing research is interesting, and it's something that's coming forward a lot, and we're seeing some of our clients considering it. Okay, next question. How do we navigate the difficulty of spontaneous learning that takes place when people work in the same office in person as opposed to a more scripted and scheduled manner of online meetings? Oh, this is huge. Yes, similar to the water cooler conversations that I just mentioned, we don't just talk about project work and tasks when we're in the office near each other. We also pick up on a lot of new knowledge about how the company works, about what the culture expects, about how to move forward with a particular project. It is definitely an important thing to consider. And when you transition um, from all in the office to all remote, or from all in the office to hybrid, it's something that should be on your mind. So thank you for asking this question. Similar to the all or nothing concept that I just spoke about with the meetings, what we're finding is that teams that put everything onto an intranet site, or everything that they possibly can onto a space where people can easily access it online, as if their team is 100% remote, they are finding more success in allowing this knowledge to filter through to their remote workers. So what sometimes happens when you're working hybrid is that as team leaders or as team members, we're finding that we rely maybe too heavily on those office interactions, or only partially communicate to our remote colleagues, or only partially put information on those intranet sites or other communal spaces online. But if you pretended that your workforce was your team, whatever it may be, was 100% remote, and communicated with that team that way, with that in mind, then you will reduce the amount of knowledge that your remote workers might be missing out on by not being in the office. Ideally, you're being consistent about transferring that information over. And that's something that comes forward when we talk about moving from the office to remote. If you don't have an intranet site, if you don't have a means of or a document that lists and details how you're going to be communicating with each other, for these kinds of updates, we're communicating on this particular platform, or for these kinds of chats, make sure you reach out here. If there isn't a guideline or a set of guidelines listed, that is something that can make it more difficult for your remote workers and for your colleagues in the office to ensure that your remote workers feel connected to that knowledge. I hope that was helpful. And that actually speaks a lot to the access to opportunity, right? The equitable access to opportunity bucket. Okay, we have another one. Okay. What kinds of team building activities can I do with my team if we're all remote full time? Okay. If you're all remote full time, I think you can adopt something that we suggest inclusive leaders consider doing in their teams, whether they're remote or in person. So we suggest that inclusive, or leaders who seek to be more inclusive, find ways to bring the conversations around what's happening outside of work into work at appropriate junctures. And one way that you can do this is by creating a ritual or a tradition, something that allows people to share a little bit about themselves in a concise way, but in a structured way, in a predictable way. So for example, perhaps you have a team meeting that you're hosting, and maybe naturally your team meeting, especially in person, naturally people walk in and they tell, they're like, oh, my weekend was this and that. And oh man, I'm feeling a little tired because of whatever. And those comments come through often in person more so than they come through in remote work. And even when they come through in remote work, sometimes they're not structured. And so only some people share. Maybe the most extroverted people are out there sharing those details. And perhaps it would be really useful for people to connect and bond and create those genuine social connections if they were to hear each other talk a little bit more about themselves and their experiences. So a tradition or a common icebreaker, something that you use every time just for a few minutes in the beginning of every meeting, can go a long way. That's one team building activity that you can do with your team, even if you're fully remote. There also might be some opportunities to celebrate, have those experiences, those happy hours, make them optional, right? Have those kinds of social experiences where it's not about the work. It's just maybe an hour where, if you can afford it, if your company can afford it, you send out maybe an Uber Eats or something like that gift card, and allow people to order their own food and come to this happy hour ready to discuss and maybe play a game, and making it optional so that people don't feel like they have to go to those events, but so that there is a space to be social and where people can feel connected to each other. We have another question here. I'm going to go ahead and read it out loud. It's a bit long here. For global companies with operations in developing nations, where the migration to remote hybrid is not as marked, yep, around working across from others who can at home. Okay. How do we balance this potential cross-cultural dissonance? Thank you for this question. This is something that has plagued a lot of our colleagues and clients, actually. How do you manage the back to work transition when different countries are on different timelines, and when there might be some different approaches to work for each of the people who are coming through? And this is something that I think no one has a perfect answer to. However, it does speak to the need for leaders in this space to be as culturally aware as possible of how this pandemic and how the transition from work in person to work remote is impacting people around the world. So I would suggest that you consider this person who's asked this question, or all of us, consider checking in with the leaders or the representatives in the different offices that we have in our global companies, checking in with them to understand what nuances and what specific differences they're seeing in how employees in their region or in their office, in their city, how they're experiencing the transitions, and really do a little bit of a listening tour around how the employees in those offices are feeling. Maybe, and like I said, maybe not necessarily reaching out directly to the colleagues that you're seeking to pull in, but reaching out to a representative or someone in that office that you know can speak to the high level experiences and cultural factors that might be coming into play here. So I would consider looking into that. And then I would also suggest that you move forward with looking at um, uh, the ways that you can make the time zones beneficial for everyone. I think this is something that, especially if this person who asked this question, if you have people who are in different time zones, who are not used to having all of their meetings focused in on one particular time zone, thinking very diligently about how you can ensure that everyone is being accommodated, which I'm sure you've already started thinking about, but it's something that often gets swept under the rug, especially in companies that are headquartered in one region of the world, and where people who are not in that region end up feeling less than supported. Okay, let's see what else we have here. I feel isolated in my workplace. Is it worth it to try and change culture where I am, or should I move to a different company that already has these measures worked into their values and practices? We're seeing a lot of people leaving their current work situations. You probably have heard of this as the Great Resignation, or there are a lot of different words that have been applied, or terms that have been applied to this shift in work and in where people work. In fact, I don't want to misquote it, but I think it was something like 1 in 5 people are leaving their workplace, or strongly considering it at this time. And so you're not alone in this question and in this feeling. And I think a lot of companies are seeking to respond to this because of how important inclusion, especially, has become to different leaders and to different employees. I hear that you feel isolated, and I think there is potential to change the culture in your workplace. Hopefully, you can use some of the strategies that I suggested earlier to the person who is thinking about how to influence change when maybe they're not a manager or a supervisor. But I also am sensitive to the fact that maybe, it's time to move forward. I can't tell you necessarily how to move on or whether or not to move on, but I can say that now it is your job market, or it's yours for the picking. There are people hiring incredibly so. There are companies really needing to prove that they value inclusion in a way that they never have before. And there are open spots that people are hungry to fill. So if you are truly feeling dissatisfied, and isolated is the word that I'm kind of latching on to here, and you feel that you maybe don't have the opportunity to make change where you are, then I say consider at least looking at other options, because there are a lot of other options right now, and companies are being really held to making their spaces more inclusive as a result. On the flip side, if your workplace is seeing that it's losing a lot of people, maybe because it isn't as inclusive as it could be, maybe it would be open to hearing your feedback. So if there are safe spaces for you to share your feedback, if there are supervisors or managers that would be open to hearing you out, I say consider that route as well. Okay. Next question. Is there a guide or resources that we can find that help us ensure that employees with disabilities, especially those who feel remote work has made their work more difficult, have the resources they need to succeed and feel included in a remote environment? Oh, this is something that we're thinking so much about. And maybe you felt this tug early on with this shift to remote work, to do things like include closed captionings on your remote meetings, or to ensure that when you're presenting different slides, that you're making sure the contrast in your slides is very, very clear and effective for those who may have low vision. There are a whole host of ways that this transition is impacting those with disabilities, and we're seeing that is both not so great and not so great ways. But also there are some that are finding it more just accessible to log into work this way, instead of having to go every day or having to find a place that's closer to their home. So there are definitely ups and downs. This question is about whether or not there is a guide or a resource that can be found. We are definitely putting together different resources around it. We've put together a blog post related to serving and uplifting employees with disabilities. We can make sure that that's something that is included in our follow-up email to all of you who have attended here today. But I like the idea of creating a full-on guide for it. Maybe we can consider that for the future. Hopefully the blog for now is useful. And I appreciate you for keeping people with disabilities in mind on this front. Okay, let's look to see what other questions we have. We have a couple more. Oh, okay. Ooh. I've asked my employees how they're feeling, and they always say things are fine, but I can feel that the energy is low and that it has shifted. What can I do to get their inputs and feelings without pushing too hard? I want them to feel included. Thank you, whoever sent this, for being honest about how you're feeling with your employees. And that can be really tricky. I'm going to assume that you're in a remote or hybrid environment as I answer this question, because there are a lot of things you can do. So narrowing it down would be a little bit easier for me to try to get more targeted here. If you're in a remote environment and you're feeling that maybe your employees are not sharing how they're really feeling, there might be something related to this idea of psychological safety that is not quite clicking right now with your team's culture. So here are some ways to build psychological safety. The first way that I'll suggest is ensuring that you yourself are modeling some the things that might be on your mind, that you are modeling, uh, sharing appropriately what might be on your mind, or how this switch to remote work might be impacting you. ensuring that you are then creating a space where if people feel so moved and comfortable that they might also want to share with you because you've shared with them, and not making it a transactional thing at all, but just modeling it and ensuring that people recognize that this is a space where that kind of thing happens. So that's one thing you can do to build some psychological safety around that. The other thing I'll suggest is having regular spaces for people to submit their feedback anonymously can go a long way. Maybe there is still some concern about maybe being connected to whatever might be on their minds. And so having something like a survey that's open and available that anyone can access at any time, that is anonymous, truly so, would be a really useful way to get people's feedback and to hear what people are thinking there. You might also want to include, similar to what we discussed earlier when we talked about the icebreaker, the tradition, that kind of thing, you might want to include a dedicated time, if not during a one-on-one meeting or during a team meeting where you're saying, hey, how are people feeling? Whoever wants to take the floor, let's hear it. Or in your one-on-one, this is the time of our one-on-one at the end when I just listen to how you're feeling, and I check in with you. That can be a really useful tool. Another thing that you might want to consider is just ensuring that when something maybe goes wrong or when someone shares something, you're watching your own reaction to how that happens, or you're watching how you create and foster an environment where that is encouraged. So you say thank you if someone gives you feedback that actually might be about you and might be hard to hear. You create a space where people are, if they ever do come forward, where you reach out to them privately afterwards and say, thank you so much for what you just shared. I know that was very brave and I really appreciated it. You can create a lot of that kind of sense of psychological safety by modeling, by creating dedicated spaces for these conversations, and then by reinforcing and encouraging instances where people come forward, whether it's remote or in person, but definitely in remote spaces, having those times dedicated to this can be really important. Okay, those are all the questions that have come through so far. That was a whirlwind. I hope you got some fun nuggets out of that. If you have any other questions, I'm open to hearing them. I'm going to move into our closeout, just to share with you a little bit more information about us. But if you have more questions, I think we have time for one or two more if you want to send them through. I hope that was helpful. So closing out here, I love that you all were able to make it to this session. I hope you found some nuggets of information that you can take with you and bring to your colleagues, to your managers, to your leaders. We do this all the time with our clients. We support them with their diversity, equity, and inclusion needs. And if you're thinking that this is something that we could work together on, either through a workshop or through anything like that, please leave us a note, sign up for a free consultation, and you can have some time to meet with myself or one of my colleagues and share some of what you're looking for, and we can see if there's room to work together. We can also follow us on social media. We have a lot of content on our Twitter, on our Instagram, on our YouTube channel, and on our LinkedIn, where many of you probably found us. So we had a good little bit of a good sign up rate over there, which was fun to see. We also have a newsletter that we send out regularly. So if you're not signed up for that, please fill it out. You can go to cnetwork.com/newsletter. I think what's important for us is that this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that is not necessarily siloed to any industry, to any kind of company, to any kind of workplace. It's something that everyone can benefit from. These practices, we hope, are practices that you can take with you to ensuring that everyone truly feels seen at work. That's why we're called Seen at Work. And so having these free resources is very important to us, including sessions like this one. We have a session like this one coming up. just like this one, a month from now, we have one coming up on October 12th, or is that 21st? Oh no, I think that might be the 21st. I apologize. I'll make a change in there. But we have one coming up and you're welcome to sign up for it. We'll also have it posted in the LinkedIn once again, and it's going to be featured in our newsletter. So if you want to get continued updates on that, please do. That next one will be about employee resource groups. So please sign up if you're curious. And guess what? Anyone who attends our sessions, these free Q&A sessions, gets 40% off one of our courses. So if you're interested in furthering your own understanding of some of these concepts, if you'd like to learn more, let us know. I'm just getting a note from my team that October 19th is the date of the next free Q&A session. So please sign up for that if you're interested. Here's how you can get 40% off your next CNET Work course. If you are interested, please send an email to info@cnetwork.com with the name of your preferred course and using the email address that you would like to use for the course. And if you do so in the next 30 minutes, you can get a discount code, which will expire in 30 days, but you have 30 days to use that discount code and get 40% off an updated or one of the courses on our site. So go ahead and bookmark that email address so that you get that there. Oh, I have another question that just came through. So we have a moment to answer it. If you want to hang tight, I'll leave this on the screen so that anyone here can send an email over to info@. What are your thoughts on instituting a camera always on policy during meetings to ensure team members are engaged in the conversations? Cameras always on is something that I personally appreciate, but I say that you should consider having a soft policy around it. Sometimes there is a need to go off camera, especially given the Zoom fatigue that a lot of us feel. And part of being inclusive is ensuring that people who might need or have certain needs around taking their eyes off of the screen or have certain needs around maybe taking a walk or something like that are able and free to do so. So I do suggest that you consider instituting that cameras on policy. I know there are quite a few workplaces that are cameras off all the time. And I do think that it can go a long way to have your face seen and to look at each other's eyes, even though sometimes we're kind of looking all over the place. There's a lot of value to that, but making it a soft policy is probably your best bet so that you do allow for that consistency and for that flexibility that some people might need. Related to that, we're seeing that some companies are adjusting their timeframes around meetings to being 25 minutes instead of 30 minutes, for example, or 50 or 55 minutes instead of an hour-long meeting, because that's something that we're seeing real fatigue happen for people. And even just the marginal 5 minutes that you might get after a 25-minute meeting between meetings can go a long way to replenishing people's focus and ability to pay attention and generally be and feel engaged. So that might be something also to keep in mind if you're going to institute those cameras on policies. Okay, well, we're done 10 minutes early. I'm happy to hang tight, but that's the end of our programming. I don't see any other questions come through. Happy to answer any others. Thank you so much for coming by. You're welcome to log off if you like or hang tight if we get any other questions.